From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Julia Carr-Katzel. It's Thursday, June 29. Last week, Treasurer Jim Chalmers confirmed that a decision on the next RBA governor will be made next month.
In July, but certainly by the time the Parliament returns, that's been our intention and our time frame all along.
The current governor, Philip Lowe's 7-year term is due to end in September, but there's no guarantee his term will be extended. In fact, some 52% of Australians think Lowe should lose his job, according to a survey for our papers.
This is a big job and it's a big call, and we're working through it in the usual methodical and considered way. I'm in the process.
Traditionally, the position is handed to the Deputy Governor. But a scathing review into the RBA found the bank needs major changes, including a substantial cultural change.
The Reserve Bank Governor needs to be well placed to implement the recommendations of the review and to take the Reserve Bank into the future.
Today, senior economics correspondent Shane Wright on the top runners for the position and what an overhaul of the RBA's culture may look like. Shane, last week the Treasurer Jim Chalmers finally confirmed that a decision on who will be the next Reserve Bank Governor will be made in July. But before we get into that decision, can you explain to us the role of RBA boss and why the person that Jim Chalmers decides to appoint matters?
While most people really don't care or don't understand who the head of the Reserve Bank is, you have to think of it more as we have the Prime Minister as head of the government. Phil Lowe, or the Governor of the Reserve Bank, is the Prime Minister of the economy. So if the Reserve Bank gets its decisions wrong about where the economy is headed, you get mass unemployment.
Good afternoon. Australia's unemployment rate has defied market expectations, rising to 3.7% in April. 4,300 jobs were lost last month.
Or, and this has been a big argument over the last 12 months, if the bank has interest rates too low and creates too much money, which is what it was during COVID, you get too much inflation.
The monthly inflation number has moved higher so far this year. For the recent period, it peaked at 8.4% in December and had fallen every month.
So the cost of living argument that people are going through right now, a large part of that is due to not just the Reserve Bank, but central banks around the world getting their jobs wrong.
Inflation nation. Americans are paying significantly more for basics such as food, fuel, and rent. The Consumer Price Index rose 8.6% in
So you may not know who Phil Lowe is, you may not even know if you tripped over him in the street, but in terms of being important in terms of your mortgage and whether you've got a job, Phil Lowe and the Reserve Bank are very important. So it's hard to go past just how essential a role that the Reserve Bank has in the operation of the entire economy.
So let's talk about Phil Lowe, the current RBA governor. He's not had an easy couple of years, and there's been speculation he won't be reappointed. So tell us about that.
So the Reserve Bank review was actually driven in part because of problems the Reserve Bank had before COVID. Phil Lowe actually delivered a speech 3 days after the 2019 election in which he said, we're going to have to start cutting interest rates. He had been holding interest rates steady for 2.5 years. Now, the analysis is that actually led to about 250,000 people being unemployed when they didn't need to be. So if you're counting down the strikes against Phil Lowe, that's a fairly large one. What most people are really focused on in the last 12 months or so has been Lowe's comments made as late as 2021 saying, don't worry, interest rates aren't going to be going up probably until 2024.
The board has reviewed a range of possible scenarios. In some of these, the conditions for an increase in the cash rate could be met during 2024, while in other scenarios, these conditions would not be.
Within 5 months, he was actually lifting interest rates. That has caused a lot of pain for a lot of people.
Australian families are in for more pain after the Reserve Bank lifted the official cash rate to its highest level in 11 years.
It's the 12th interest rate rise in 13 months.
The last couple of years telling us, oh no, go and get a mortgage, borrow as much money as you can, don't worry, interest rates are not going to go up. And now we've had 12 interest rate rises in a row. The bloke couldn't have got it more wrong. Why is there a debate?
Now, Phil Lowe's not Robinson Crusoe amongst central bankers in getting it wrong when it came to when inflation would require higher interest rates, but it's a big hit for all those people who've taken out large mortgages on the understanding that, we're going to be fine for a few years, interest rates aren't going to go anywhere, I'll be able to get down my mortgage. Now he's actually saying, well, unemployment's probably going to have to go up a little bit, we might need to put more pain into people's back pockets to bring inflation under control. Those are the sort of tensions that are really at the heart of the argument that Lowe won't be reappointed for September.
And we will come back to the review and how the board will change. But for now, we can't know for certain, but it's not looking likely that Phil Lowe will be reappointed, following, as you say, the fairly tumultuous term he served out as RBA boss. So let's talk about who else might be in the running. Perhaps we can start with Michelle Bullock. She's the deputy. She would typically be the next in line for the big job, but that might not be the case this time around.
That's right. Since 1960, only one person who has not been the deputy governor has become governor. Michelle Bullock, if she would be appointed, she'd be the first woman to lead the organisation. She's been there since 1985, and if you are the deputy, you are groomed to be the successor to the bank. So even though the governor is appointed and the deputy governor technically are appointed by the treasurer of the day, the bank really controls who gets promoted internally to become deputy and the various assistant governors from which the deputies are chosen. If you think of a short list, Michelle Bullock's name is definitely on that list, but, and this is the issue we'll come to a bit later about the Reserve Bank review, being at the bank since 1985 at this point in time is perhaps not a great reason to think that you're going to become the governor.
And who else is in the running if not the deputy? Is there anyone else particularly surprising?
The number of people you could make the Reserve Bank governor is a very short list anywhere. Monetary policy is very technical, and so you can have run-of-the-mill economists, but they can't run the Reserve Bank. And this is why you end up, at the moment, Stephen Kennedy, who is the Treasury Secretary, who sits on the Reserve Bank board. That's one of his responsibilities, and who's known as a very good economist, very good macroeconomist, very good monetary policy expert. That's why his name is floating around as amongst those. Another one is Jenny Wilkinson, who is the Finance Secretary. She would fit the mould as first female to become the head of the bank. She has worked at the Reserve Bank as well, and she's also headed the Parliamentary Budget Office, which means that she's been able to work in an independent organisation. So you've got those sort of people. Former Deputy Governor Guy Debelle, who now works for Twiggy Forrest, that's another person who's in the mix and whose name's been suggested. Warwick McKibben, who's sat on the RBA board, here's another name that's floating around. Then you head overseas, there's a few people being discussed. Justin Wolvers, who, an Australian economist, perhaps at one stage the best young economist in the world. Someone's name has been suggested as possible either on the board or coming in as governor. So this isn't like AFL Trade Week when you've got the whole debates over the top 20, who's going to be picked up. We are not talking about a large number of on-ballers or future centre-half forwards. These are a small handful of people that you could pick up with.
Sure. Okay. And so, as you've said before, there are obviously even more big changes expected to the Reserve Bank following the review. So can you remind us about that review and some of the key recommendations made?
Yeah. So the Reserve Bank was the only central bank in the developed world that hadn't undergone some sort of independent review in the last 10, 20 years. And the review says, right, we need to set up a separate committee that'll oversee the setting of monetary policy. They'll have a board of directors that'll oversee the bank itself. The bank, for most people think of the Reserve Bank, they just think of interest rates. if you had a $5 or $10 note in your wallet or your purse, you would actually see Philip Lowe's signature on it. The bank controls our money supply. They control and oversee how we make our payments. So if you're using Apple Pay, you're using a card, everywhere along the line, the Reserve Bank's overseeing how that works. So at the end of the day, it's not just the cost of money, but also all of our money is being overseen by this institution. So you've got that element to it. The review also said there needs to be a lot of cultural change within the bank itself. It has got into a set of old ways about how it deals, particularly between its executive and the 1,000 people or 1,200 people below them. There's a lot of economic research that is done that never sees the light of day. There's a lot of discussion about whether the executive effectively steamrolls the challenging information that's coming out from all these bunch of very smart economists below the executive. There's an agreement between the Reserve Bank governor and the treasurer of the day. So when we talk about the Reserve Bank's inflation target, 2 to 3%, that's not in the bank's charter. That is in the agreement between the treasurer and the governor. That hasn't been changed since 2016. There is an argument within monetary policy circles that the 2016 agreement, which was between Lowe and then Treasurer Scott Morrison, actually enabled the bank to focus too much on financial stability, and that held it back from cutting interest rates when it probably should have been cutting interest rates ahead of COVID to get more people into work. So that part of it has to be nutted out by the end of the year. So you've got that, and you have this argument coming through the review. Should you need cultural change? Does that mean you take somebody as governor who's been at the bank since the 1980s? So if you put it in your mind, if you thought, say, the head of the Commonwealth Bank gets a report saying we need to overhaul everything we do, would you go with somebody who had been there since the days of the VFL, predating the AFL, predating Super League? If you're into rugby league, this was when you had Canberra come into the New South Wales Rugby League competition. That's the sort of mindset change that's being discussed at the moment.
Okay. And Shane, just finally, so say Phil Lowe is not reappointed and instead, as you say, the Treasurer decides to appoint an outsider. And on top of that, there's a big board shake-up as per the RBA review recommendations. So how do you expect the economy, or at least Australia's approach to the economy, might change?
Look, there's only been one outsider brought in to head the Reserve Bank, and that was Bernie Fraser back in 1989. He was the Treasury Secretary when Paul Keating made him the RBA boss. He drove interest rates up to 17%. Australia went into a recession, but it killed inflation. It came at a huge cost. We had unemployment at 11% in 1993 because of largely what the bank had done. A pivotal part of this is the governor's importance inside the Reserve Bank actually comes down a little under the review's proposals. We don't have the great one person in charge of the whole thing. You get this specialist monetary policy committee, it's being set up to sort of challenge the orthodoxy to make sure that the best decisions are being made. So it'll be a large amount of that will be how the new governor can deal with being challenged, being able to herd a bunch of monetary policy cats to get their thinking in the same sort of direction. That's one of the most interesting aspects of changing what is a really pivotal part of the Australian economic architecture. Most people they hear about Martin Place, which is where the RBA headquarters is, but the importance of that to anyone from Junee to Geraldton, it's hard to overestimate just the importance of what that person will have to be able to do.
Thanks so much for your time, Shane.
Cheers, Joy.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by me, Julia Carcatzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Julia Carcatzel. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.